All right, Jeremy, it's great to have you here with us today and welcome. You can go ahead and share your screen.
All right, let me do that. See, okay, are we looking at, oh, there's my bio. Okay, do we see title slide, greatest story ever told?
Yep, we're all good.
Okay, great. Yeah, so a couple housekeeping items. One, yeah, it'll probably be hard for me to follow the chat while I present, so feel free to presume you're messaging Heather, and then Heather, interrupt me anytime. I have both kind of like general principles and topics, but then also a number of case studies that we could dive deeper into. So probably what I'll do is I'll go more quickly through the basic building blocks, and then we can spend more time on the portion of greatest interest to you. And just final two things. One, I had knee surgery last week, and these I find these pain meds make me unusually emotional. So if for some reason I get teary, it's not really because I think mission storytelling is so beautiful or that my principles are so beautiful, but it's been a pretty weird week as I adjust these pain meds. And then two, apologies, I have two very active cats who don't understand that when I sit at a computer like this, I am working. And so if they potentially fight in the background, don't worry, it's just cats, it's not my children, and I'm safe. So with that out of the way, man, I wish I could see your faces to read the room on all that. Yeah, let's begin. So yeah, so this is called Your Greatest Story Ever Told, how your missions writing can reach more readers. Again, quickly my bio, I've been at CT for 15 years. Currently what I'm working on is endeavoring to better fulfill Billy Graham's founding vision for CT as a central nervous system for the body of Christ. A full third of our readers are outside the US, and during the pandemic, we got serious about multilingual publishing. So we now regularly translate into 6 core languages, another 6 test ones. We produced 2,500 translations since the pandemic, very exciting. And yeah, over that time, I've had the good fortune to both be given some really exciting stories to tell for CT. If again, I'm presuming everybody knows this. If not, you know, we were founded in the 1950s by Billy Graham. We historically and primarily were a monthly magazine aiming to serve Christian or primarily evangelical thought leaders. Obviously, for decades now, we've been a website as well, and we're at a point where you know, easily probably 3/4 of our content is online only. So on the left is our recent print cover. On the right is the homepage. And again, you'll notice on both the, say the Tim Keller obit that I mentioned there on the bottom, we currently are really emphasizing doing a better job of helping stories and discipleship and knowledge cross language barriers. And so we've committed to Spanish, Portuguese, French, Korean, Chinese, and Indonesian. And then we're testing some promising additional languages, Russian, Japanese, Arabic. So, and then just kind of as I kind of frame what my career has been and kind of what I think a lot of us are aiming to do, I'd like to do 2 things. One, I always liked the kind of like example, if you do, you know, if you go to a Christian college and study journalism, there's the idea of Luke being the first journalist, you know, given how he both structures the book of Luke and the book of Acts, and also how he describes himself. You know, there's these eyewitnesses, he's carefully investigated things, decided to write an quarterly account so that, you know, those who were not eyewitnesses can both know what happened and know with certainty that it happened. So I do like this idea of journalism is a deeply biblical thing, and you know, we've been doing it since the days of Luke. But again, you know, journalism has these other kind of rules or maxims, and so this is probably one of my favorite ones from the more secular J schools, where if your mother says she loves you, check it out. 2 sources. You're always looking to confirm what you're told, and often the more people you talk to and interview, the more nuanced the full picture gets. But I guess at CT, what we're attempting to do is, continue the legacy of Luke, but with the benefit of the kind of journalistic, skepticism of the general media. And then one of the reasons that I wanted to, I'm excited to talk to you today, both about, give you some behind the scenes look at how I did a couple of my bigger award-winning features, but really, for about 10 years now, I've been mostly an online journalist versus traditionally a print journalist, and I've just been astounded by two things. One is that our stories have fewer readers than we think. There's something nice when we were, primarily producing stories for print, and they go out into the world, and you really don't exactly know who reads them or what they think. You get a sense of it, right? I mean, you sustain enough subscribers to continue publishing, and clearly you're making just enough people happy to stay in business. Again, when you get feedback, it's usually more pronounced among the minority of dissidents, because when people are pleased with you, they really don't think to go out of their way to tell you that. But the both the promise and downside of how we're all essentially online publishers now is you can, with very fine precision, thanks to Google Analytics and other metrics, realize just how who reads your article, where they read it, when they read it. And if you look at a world of 7 billion people, it can be discouraging if you only get a couple, 1,000 readers in something that you really worked hard on. So I think a lot about this idea that, our stories have fewer readers than we think. And then really our stories have fewer readers than it deserves, right? You put a lot of effort and labor into your story. The people you highlighted, whether it's a church plant or a refugee camp, or your people likely gave of their time and energy to give you access, or entrusted their opinions with you, their activities with you, their fear, hoping they're going to get a benefit from it. But in some situations, they can be putting themselves at risk. And so one reason I've been kind of more willing to learn how to play the online game, and both, get better as a writer, but also get better as a basically a marketer of the stories that I write, is I'm really eager to have each of my stories find its maximum possible readership, because the people in the story who I am serving as a bridge, I really want to expose their viewpoints and their activities to as many people as possible, so that hopefully people can pray more effectively, people who are moved can engage more effectively. And so these are two things I think about a lot. So what I'm going to do is walk you through a couple key, some I guess of the articles I'm the most proud of. They did happen to win some top level awards with both the Evangelical Press Association and the Religion News Association. So getting some affirmation from both Christian and secular press bodies. The one article is I went to India for a couple of weeks and did a feature, essentially trying to both demonstrate the clear surge in persecution by Hindu nationalists against India's Christian minority, but also to locate that persecution among their other felt needs. And so that's one reason we went with the framing of outpacing persecution. And one reason that a lot of the photos in this spread that I'll walk you through are kind of more on the positive side than the negative side. Basically at this time, and sadly, the problem has only grown worse. It is not hard to find examples of beleaguered Christians, often poor, who are being persecuted as Hindu nationalism continues to gain strength in India. But what I've found from, again, the ability online to see who reads what is how, unfortunately, the longer a trend like that occurs, the less and less interested people get in it, right? A headline like, hey, a church is attacked, burned, 10 people injured. Like the first time that happens in a given country or given place, a larger number of people are interested to learn more. But then as that kind of becomes something which is like habitual and not like, essentially news, it's really discouraging how many people choose to pass on that kind of information. They either feel they already know enough about it, or they've decided they're not interested in it. So one of the goals of this feature was to let's both accurately capture the persecution in India, but also let's accurately display the fuller life of Indian Christians, because for those of you who know India and have been to it, obviously, even if they're just 3% of a billion people, 3% of a billion people is more Christians than a lot of quote unquote like Christian countries that we might think of in the in Europe or Africa. And so the range of experience, the kind of resources the community has within it are pretty significant. And so that's one reason that as you look through the spread, the photos are, I think, overall more kind of positive and like enabling versus negative and discouraging. Like my goal would be to not only convince you that there is substantial persecution in India and you should be praying, but that again, it is not a hopeless situation and Indian Christians are not helpless. And hopefully the result of your experience of going through this article leaves you desiring more to pray for the Indian church, to engage the Indian church, et cetera. The other one I'll walk through is kind of a similar piece. And in theory, I can identify some lessons that I learned between these two articles, because this one is basically a similar story. In this case, based on Nigeria, took place a couple years later. Again, another a very populous country with a large Christian community. In this case, roughly 50%. Again, a clear increase in persecution. And again, a similar goal to go and demonstrate both the problem, but to frame it among the church's other felt needs, again, to not to depict Nigerian Christians not only as persecuted or not only as poor, the many are, and then to leave the reader not feeling hopeless or not feeling that the Nigerian Christian is like helpless. Admittedly, just given what was taking place at the time, because I did go in the wake of a number of mass casualty events and went to a couple, like mass graves and all that. The imagery that went along with this story was not as say positive or like affirming, because they're at a different like arc in that journey. But again, in the article, there's a effort to appropriately like balance the persecution, the negativity, the emotion, the pathos, with other aspects of Nigerian Christian life. This also involved 2 weeks of like travel. I probably interviewed about 100 people for it. Went to 10 states. Had the benefit, and both of these articles benefited from traveling with a professional photographer named Gary S. Chapman, who, when Heather saw the earlier version of this, was a co-presenter of mine. And so I'm grateful for his ability to both capture, say, the need in like an image like this, but then also say in the prior image, you can derive some beauty amid stark circumstances. And as we all know, images really help move people through a piece. An image tells 1,000 words. And I was really honored to be able to devote the time and resources to a fellow brothers and sisters, experiencing a significant moment of need, and hopefully our particular way of mediating their story to the unaware wider world, both Christian and non, via our publication, but also just via Google and like Facebook. The goal is to help expand the voices and the experiences, the wisdom and the desires of the people in these pieces. So really what this boils down to, and the longer I've done these, I've probably produced, easily over 1,000 articles by now at CT, written myself, several hundred. This is not like rocket science, but I think if we think about these elements in this way, we'll all get better at what we do. So, overall, your article is going to have 4 primary components. It's going to have like facts. It's going to have quotes, it's going to have paraphrases, and it's going to have anecdotes or color. Again, the fifth is the images, but since most of you are either the writers or the editors in charge of the writing, we'll leave the image choices and strategy to another webinar for another another day. I will say if anyone does have questions about how best to work with a photographer, I do have experiences of both traveling independently of a photographer and like hoping that they can retrace my steps, or essentially they're my shadow and they do everything I do. And actually over time, I've discovered it's better to build in a fair amount of intentional time apart, because their needs are often different from my needs as the writer, and particularly that's illustrated in the Nigeria example. So we can get into the writer photographer dynamic during the Q&A if you would like. And again, I'm presuming that it seemed to me based on the registration that again most of you are also veterans at this craft. Whether or not you've worked at your particular missions agency or ministry for a long time, you've been telling stories for a long time, you don't really need like a 101 level course on how to gather facts, quotes, etc. But I think particularly as I've had the benefit of building the first half of my career kind of like in a traditional like print setting, and then as I became essentially our like online like managing editor for a while, and did a lot of our analytics regarding the stories. It's just really underscored for me more than ever. There's both the effort that goes into the raw material of your story, and then if you understand better the kind of eventual pathways that your article will travel and how you could reach people and get them to have an open heart, an open mind to taking the information to do something differently with it. That really has changed how I take that raw material, how I organize it, how I structure it. I'm not per se, I'm not writing for Google, or like for Facebook, but probably like you, very frequently I end up with relatively 50-50 decisions to make about which source stays in or gets dropped, who goes where. What we all wish we had a larger like word count, but particularly for print, we're obviously constrained by the news hole, and then a designer is always going to be demanding more space for photos, which requires you to cut hundreds of precious words. So it's those kind of that inevitable winnowing down of an article from the, say you've got 10,000 words worth of raw material and you're being asked to produce something that's only like 2,000 words. There's a lot of choices that are not clear, that are a mix of I guess science and art, right? And I've found the more I've learned about the eventual like packaging, which will be in the second half of this webinar, the better I've gotten. Anyway, back to this slide. So 4 elements of report article. Overall, like facts, my kind of overall approach is as few as necessary, as succinct as possible, and like pace them out. I think many times there's a temptation to, you did a lot of research and you gathered a lot of facts, and like most of the people who are capturing facts, whether they're academics or there's like the bio page of a ministry, or there's Wikipedia or Britannica or something. The facts are often very, very lengthy, very solid. They're kind of either presuming a lot of interest of the reader, or they're giving no regard to that. And I think those of us that write more for mass media or popular media, or again, those of you that are just producing general PR or like collateral to engage your existing audience, we all know how kind of like fickle they become over time. Everybody is very time starved. Everybody is information saturated. So I find when I'm editing new writers, because I do a fair amount of editing, I'm just often struck by how they haven't gathered anything that's wrong, but they've just left way too much of it all like together. And so I really emphasize really like facts, the minimum number necessary, as succinct as possible, pace them out. This kind of goes with quotes like as well. Overall, I think one of the typical beginner mistakes is people will allow sources to basically restate like facts, like to say verbally things about their ministry that, you probably could have, again, to paraphrase, you could say it better and shorter than they did. So the material that should stay in direct quote form, as again, this is just a reminder for all of us. These are the things that people said better than you ever could, or it's safer to let them say it and not you. So if it's a relatively, maybe it's an aggressive assertion, maybe it's a dubious assertion, maybe it's one that is going to be like contested by other people in the article or by people in your constituency. It's like smart to let those like statements stay directly in the voice of that source who is willing to make the assertion. Otherwise, again, what you're looking for is that thing that, again, them based on their experience and their personality and their proximity, they have just said something which stopped you in your tracks, which gave you a urge to like capture as quickly as possible, on your notepad or on the notes app of your phone. Those are things that should stay. And then as much as possible, when you're looking at the raw material of the quotes, anything which is essentially a fact that they've just restated, drop it. And that gets into the third part, like paraphrasing, with both like the facts and like quotes, the raw material, you want to boil things down as short as possible. I mean, people, most of the audience research, when they like track eyeballs and they, connect people to machines, like, people kind of decide in, sentence by sentence, if not in like groupings of 3 or 4 words, whether to bail or not on an article. So that's one reason we at CT, we kind of favor more of that newspaper style of, maybe a paragraph is maybe 3 sentences at the most, right? Because if I've got something which is like 7 or 8, a graph that's 7 or 8 sentences, and I've got my, my really powerful like money quote in the middle, I've got my, call to action in the middle or something. If my first sentence isn't strong enough to hook someone into the graph, and if my last sentence doesn't give them a desire to go to the next graph, I likely will lose them. And so we, again, one of the main things I do when I'm editing newer writers is I break up their graphs massively, and then again probably delete maybe like a third of what they've got there, because again, they're either facts that are too lengthy, quotes that are basically facts, etc. And then really what I want to emphasize in this presentation is the anecdotes, the color. I suppose a weakness of the case studies I'm going to walk through is they all happen to be times where I went into the field and got to witness something in person. And in that case, you're really looking to prove that you were there. You're looking to take the reader with you. Again, you invested like time and energy to go into the field, whereas I'm sure like your ministry is like ours, where we definitely don't have the the budget to do everything we would like to do at the level of excellence we would like to do it. So these opportunities are rare. You really want to get your ROI from it, so you can get permission to do it again in the future. And so I find myself in these kind of articles, I'm really emphasizing a lot of anecdotes and color. Again, I'm cutting the facts and the quotes like to the bone, paraphrases again like to the bone, because I've just been really struck by how often you can find symbolism in the small details that like illustrates the point. It both underscores you were there, it underscores that these people are real, and it kind of like you can do your editorializing through the anecdotes and color that you choose without, again, a overt, heavy-handed call to action or instruction on how people should feel, how people should think. Like very often these anecdotes really sell themselves, and that's one reason I've actually come to feel them quite a bit. A final point on that idea, we do have obviously a lot of experience with structuring articles where we did not go there into the field. So, for example, with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, I've got an excellent colleague who's done probably about 25 articles now, and actually I've given a presentation on how he's done that effectively from afar. And so if that's something of interest, because most of you are not in a place to go into the field the way I've been, we can again focus on that in the Q&A.
Can I ask
did you try to say something?
Yep. Just a quick question that came in from Sherry. She's asking, how long after gathering all the raw interview data does it take for you to write a story of 4,000 words or so?
Oh, how long? Yeah, that's a good question. So honestly, I mean, in a perfect scenario, you would come back from the field and you would just, like tackle everything that like week, right, while it's as fresh as possible. I overall, like most of my kind of feature writing has, had to accommodate more shorter form, more urgent content. Like I've never been like just a feature writer. So like some of these, I mean, honestly, most of these articles, they probably came together probably like 6 to 8 weeks after I was in the field. But that's not 6 to 8 weeks of like nonstop physical like work. That's because of, and again, like while they all went online, they were primarily conceived as cover stories in print. And so for us, the soonest kind of a turnaround we can do on a print story is like 6 to 8 weeks, given the issues with printing and distribution. So then, because of that, they get backed out and committed to farther in advance. So usually, if I do something in the field, I've got about a month before I truly have to finish it, and then it's always a matter of adjudicating shorter form, online only, like urgent stuff, and then chipping away like your big feature. So yeah, unfortunately, I don't have a hard, like say ratio of like, 4,000 words requires 6, hours of labor. Obviously, the more you do this, the faster you'll get at it. I mean, really writing is a muscle. And then the more stories you have under your belt, like each one, you're going to notice things that went well, things you would have done better. One of the examples from Lebanon that I'll mention is, like a good example of like, because my instincts were so honed, I kind of knew exactly what I needed from the get-go, and that one was relatively quick. I suppose the final thing I would say is I am nervous about doing too much, say like writing, because I think you should be very open to discovering that the sources on the ground and both the reality they're living and the points they want you to emphasize are often very different from what you thought going into it and doing your general research. And I get very nervous that we would that we would try to fit the people in the field and the facts on the ground into the narrative we already want to sell. So really, with both these articles, I went in with very general like premise. Like I knew there was a clear, demonstrable increase in persecution, but I was curious where it ranked among the other issues facing the church, and was the church so beleaguered that it was hopeless and feeling helpless. But then where I landed on that, and say maybe, I don't know, maybe India ended up on like, I don't know, like on a scale of 1 to 10, like at a 5, then Nigeria at a 7. But I was very open to writing a like 10 out of 10, like this is a 5-alarm fire kind of article. Or I was very open to writing a, hey, you've only heard about these persecution incidents, but man, like that's not the majority experience. Here's all this other stuff you need to pay attention to. So I would, I guess, encourage you to be comfortable doing more time on the writing on the back end, because you want to let what you found determine it. Obviously, you can do some of the general facts in advance. And again, just try to, even though you gathered, say, thousands of words of precious facts, like really be willing to release the majority of them, because much more important, I mean, basically are those direct quotes and then the anecdotes. So one thing I did in the other webinar that Heather found intriguing was I went through these past articles and I color coded to see, how did I fall? What the heck did I do? So in this case, the blue are the facts, yellow are the quotes, the paraphrases are in green, and then the anecdotes are in purple. And so as you can see, the bulk of the opening spread is anecdotal. I do have like facts there. And again, this is what I did. I'm not arguing that this particular ratio is like, the like golden ratio, right? I would probably with more time still refine this article. And I there were definitely deficiencies that I saw in it as I brought to life. But on the spread, you'll see here's some more quotes. Like in yellow, I started to part of it depends on the strength of quotes you get, and to what extent a leading your I guess like one way to look at it is you have two strategic choices. You could kind of like lead the reader on your own journey, essentially bring them along on like a travelogue of sorts, where you set out to learn something, you did all this stuff, here you are capturing it, but you keep the structure of how you found it. So basically you're writing a one-act play. People like come on and like come off. You're trying to have them come on in the most effective order and not take too much time, but they advance the narrative and then they disappear, right? So in some of these cases, I'm trying to hew to the chronology as much as possible. But there are certain stories that just really don't allow for that, and you do have to take a much more of a idea-driven or kind of like systematic approach, and then that might affect your ratio. But again, overall, I suppose the main takeaway is like the overall the blue facts are relatively minor, right? The quotes are very tight. So like, look at how short these like quotes are here. Like, these are people I would have spent, I don't know, an hour with or something. They gave me like thousands of words. I'm really trying to narrow them down to the thing that they said that no one else can like say. Again, paraphrases, I'm trying to get as much as possible in as short as words as possible. Anecdotes I'm being very generous with, so that whole page 34 is like almost all anecdotal. And then I think on this particular one, if we were to really map it out, a lot of the facts are basically in the middle. Like I don't want to hit people with a bunch of facts at the start, because I really don't know if they're interested or not. And really, it's better to presume their disinterest, because then that will make you harder to craft a better story. But then also, I want to leave them with something which is really kind of like inspiring and like a point to ponder. And so very often I look for an anecdote which is symbolic. So in this case, this is, of everything I witnessed, there was a moment where a group of schoolgirls were singing a worship song, and it just so happened that the words of the worship song were very evocative and symbolic in terms of, when a believer is beleaguered, where they run to the mountain, they ran to the hill, they ran to the ocean, they ran to my God answered me. And so it's an article about like sin, but really through the transition sentence that then sets up the like exit like quote. I tried to hit the right tone, so it's both not hopeless and like helpless, but also it's not say super rosy and super Christian-y, right? And then it was nice that I could find an anecdote that illustrated that point and a quote that illustrated that point. And then it's almost like I view it as like sticking the landing in like gymnastics or something. Let's see, is there another? Okay, Doug asks, when must you obtain written permission or some other documentation to use the image of a person in your publications? Yeah, so that's a great question. Again, this is, it's definitely beneficial to to have a photographer with you who gets to like worry about that, and has the professional training on when to make that decision, and again has like the form if you need the form. Actually, I can get in more detail in that in the Q&A, because a part of it depends on, right, are you probably in theory what you have is you have a host who is walking you through a public setting and explaining to you what it like means, and so in like that case, you're often relying on them to tell you what is permissible and not. But then again, since you should have a bit of skepticism about their knowledge of how all the people you could possibly document, how they would feel about being a part of your article. This is one reason when I'm going through the editing process, I will probably favor shots which are more like crowd-like, less focused on a particular person, something that again was very public, not private. So like the photo of the children there's like 30 kids there, like not, I haven't taken pulled aside a single child, got a really close-up shot. Again, the whole historic thing that our ministries did 30 years ago was try to make it as emotional as possible, the classic child in the dirt with like flies on their head or something. Like that's clearly going too far in making someone an object. And then also again, the whole problem with photographing children without their parents' permission. Whereas the photo in the top left there, again, that's someone who knows they're participating in the story, wants to be in the story. And then based on the policy of your organization, you either cover yourself legally by having them commit to that formally via some sort of a waiver, or maybe you don't, but just like ethically you've made sure the person knows they're participating both not in quotes, but also with their image. See, is that, okay, and then Yvonne asks, is it okay to reword a quote a bit to shorten or make more sense? Especially if English is not their first language. Yeah, man, that is a great question. And I would say a couple things. So one, I would say it's a spectrum. I do favor preserving the quote as much as possible. And if I really want to reword it, I will, and again, in theory, I can reach the source. I will, I mean, essentially it's a paraphrase, but one that I want to preserve as a direct quote. So I will ask them, hey, you said these like 3 sentences, and what I'd really like to say is this shortened form, which takes, the first part of your first sentence and the second part of your third sentence and like mashes them together. And obviously, ideally, it's nice not to have ellipses or something, or like brackets. Yeah, so I guess basically what I would say is I try to show my work. So, if I could not reach the source and I am concerned that I'm being too editorialized in how I'm condensing them, particularly if it's like sensitive, because it's about, like intercommunal like harmony, or it's about, evangelism in a, non-Christian setting. I'll try to be cautious. So there are times where I will make such a rewording or a contraction, but I'll use like a bracket or an ellipsis to show that these are not the exact words that came out of their mouth. Ideally, I have a way to reach them to ask for permission on what I want to do. And that is a good reason to build some extra vetting time with sources if your situation allows. So for example, our editor in the Middle East, who works with a lot of Muslim background believers and has, really done an impressive job of getting them to comment on, often politics publicly. One way he's done that is, he gives them a chance to review their quotes as well as the like context graph above or below. They don't get to see what other people said. This is still a journalistic enterprise, but they understand that we need to condense them for effectiveness, but they get a chance to make sure that the way we've condensed them has not caused a lot of unintentional problems. And so, sorry, there's a little more time in that. Okay, tell Heather, I'll stop trying to do your job as well. I'm closing the chat.
Yeah, we do have another question in here, but I think go ahead and keep going and we'll get
sure. Yeah, again, I apologize. Yep. And yeah, so instead of, I was going to call out some of the details in these stories, but again, you can review these slides like later. I think you'll understand my point. So I suppose you don't need too many details right now in terms of like, oh, how did I choose in that song versus the other songs? Let me get through the other like kind of main building blocks, and then yeah, but I mean, honestly, these are really great questions, and I really wish we were in person where we could kind of more round robin weigh in on them, right? Because I would love to learn from you guys as well. So okay, yeah, so another good example, the probably the article I'm the proudest of is I did get a chance to do an article on the refugee highway back when there was a lot of people fleeing ISIS in Iraq and Syria. And, we knew we wanted to bring a lot of attention to the issue, but we knew the challenge of, unfortunately, it seems like, the bigger things become and the more prolonged they become, the harder it is to get someone to care, to pray, to give. I think again, we all know this. So again, image tells 1,000 words. We spent a lot of time since, obviously I couldn't, I didn't have the budget at the time. We had actually just had our first kid about a month before I went. So my wife was amazingly generous, let me go to Iraq a month after becoming a father. We spent a lot of time on the landing. What is just the right image that, again, kind of achieves that balance that you and I are trying to achieve in the text. And so this was a image that was, yeah, again, very evocative. It was both very beautiful, but it conveyed the need, the agency. Again, this is the spread. So we called it God at Work along the refugee highway. Evangelicals in Iraq and Greece don't know how to, quote unquote, solve the refugee crisis shaking their hometowns, but they do know how to serve suffering people in their displacement. Again, the goal is an article which truly demonstrates to you that there is a significant problem that you should feel broken over, but because we want to motivate you, not discourage you, we are trying to find that fine line of, again, that fine balance. It's not too hopeless and helpless, but it's not too rosy and God will make a way. So again, the text and the image work together. And yeah, so the way this this went, again, in this case, apologize, this was a previous presentation, so the color coding has changed. So the pink here is the facts, and so you'll notice on this, actually on this, opening spread, I barely have any facts, okay? A part of that is, in this case, I am presuming some knowledge of the reader, because I by no means was the first person to tell the world that Christians were being persecuted by these Muslim extremists. So again, why spend a lot of time, and particularly dropping a ton of facts that risk, again, if you already know it, you're going to bail, right? And if you already know it and you decided you don't care, you're going to bail. So, again, once I feel like I've hooked people through that, I start to give them more facts and like larger chunks of facts. So again, on each of these spreads, it's a distinct minority that are facts. Again, the like quotes, again, I am a big believer in quotes. Again, you want the things that people said better than you that you cannot say yourself. But again, you need these really, really tight, because I think the danger is we allow far too many people to just restate facts as quotes, or we presume too much interest in the reader. And I think you want to treat the quotes rather aggressively. Again, locate them at either the top or the bottom of one of your paragraphs. So like if you study this page later, you'll see I am very, very rarely having a direct quote be in the middle of a graph. Like they should always begin one or end one. Being in the middle, you're risking people bailing, because again, your setup sentence was not good enough. Your exit sentence was not good enough. And again, a very, very common rookie mistake, which again, probably many of you see in the people you edit, is what people will do is they will just paraphrase the quote as their graph that sets up the quote, then they give the quote. And basically they're doing the same thing twice, neither of which is effective. So again, the blue here are the direct quotes. Again, in this case, I did choose a structure as more of a travel log. So that's one reason for the density of quotes in the spread. Probably ideally, I would not do that again. But again, once I feel like I've kind of hooked the person, and again, in this case, I probably had easily like 100 sources. There's a frustration that, again, this is a one-act play. Everybody gets one chance to appear, play their part to advance the storyline, and disappear. How many characters can I fit in without making the audience like bail? And so one reason to, again, I'm still keeping them tight. I'm still keeping them at the front or end of a graph, but this does get relatively quote heavy towards the end. Again, the paraphrasing is there. So the yellow is like the paraphrasing. If these are maybe 50 words at a time, ideally I'm fitting in, several hundred words of research into those like sections. And then the anecdotes, again, like I was there, I went in person, I spent 2 weeks. I'm looking for examples of things that speak volumes. And so the benefit of a photographer being with you is when you witness something, so that image on the left of Island Kurdi, this is a photograph of a Syrian boy who unfortunately drowned and washed up on a beach and was captured in an image. It became very controversial. Was the image appropriate or not? But it did really become very iconic, and briefly spurred re-engagement in the issue. So as I encountered in a very rural part of Iraq such a evocative mural capturing him, I knew I wanted to both photograph it and include in the article, because again, it conveyed 1,000 words. The other thing on this spread, for example, these children's drawings over here, I went to, so basically it was the former Olympic stadium in Athens, or the section where they did the rhythmic gymnastics, which had become a transitional housing center for all these primarily Afghan families. And so they had a wall which was covered with like thousands of like children's drawings, right? And most of these were relatively tragic. So I spent I don't know, maybe like an hour kind of studying all of them, looking for the 2 or 3 that really again, they said the most in a way that I couldn't. One option I have is to put them in photos. So this photo of the son weeping as it watches a boat of refugees cross the sea. And then there were a couple where because the text was so evocative, I put them into the anecdotes. And again, I think those convey more than the facts could, and in some ways more than the like quotes could, because these are objects of permanence. So I'll largely skip over Lebanon and give you a crash course on like titles and timing, and then we'll get into the Q&A. But I guess the thing I'll say about this one is this is an example of where I spotted a ripe opportunity to tell a story I'd always wanted to tell, and I needed to help the NGO or the ministry. They make the connection between their work in the field and like the reader. So again, this is also related to the mass displacement from like ISIS from like Iraq and Syria. I had known for a long time that this was a problem in like Lebanon, and needed more like attention. And then so basically this probably came to me through a, let's see, it was a press release from World Vision, and it was one of, I don't know, I'd probably gotten dozens at that point. I had not enacted a story based on any of them because I hadn't quite seen my entry point as a journalist to dive on in. But like basically in the middle of this press release, way down in the middle, it had this information about how the refugees were working in the vineyards of Lebanon's version of like Napa Valley. And as soon as I saw that, like boom, my journalistic brain starts like going off, right? Because if doing titles is a part of your job, you're always looking for ways to take something which is like known and super popular and make it more deep and profound. And so instantly, I thought of Steinbeck's famous novel, the Grapes of Wrath. The idea that Lebanon has a Napa Valley, and the idea that something like a Napa Valley is swarming with refugees is a way for my primarily American audience to both like again give them unexpected contrast, drive them into something. There's like basically the title basically came to me, and I knew that I could sell this title if like the story held up, right? So then I decided to advocate for it. We went and like did it. It was a shorter like form thing. It was I was only there for like a week. I had to rely on some of the third-party photography. I couldn't do my own. But again, when you're looking for anecdotes that drive it home, so these are like the final two graphs of the whole thing. And so basically, of the 6 refugee families that I visited to hear their stories and decide which ones could help me tell what part of the story. This one woman, as we're sitting there, I'm looking at her, and I noticed 2 things. Like one, her wedding ring was on her right hand instead of her left hand, like we would do in the States. And I was intrigued by that, and I just kind of asked, oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize that that Arabs do rings differently. And so it turned out no, normally she would wear it on the left finger as well. That's a tradition that's uncommon, but she had lost so much weight from so much worry that she had to wear it on the right because it wouldn't stay on her left, and that became a very poignant detail that underscores better than a bunch of facts about her food insecurity or like the cost of like bread and rice, like the idea that she wears her wedding finger on a different hand as a direct like consequence of her displacement, like that detail spoke volumes. So I put it in, and then as we're talking, in this case I had to wait for some of the pauses in translation. And so during the translation, what I try to do is I try to do a lot of observing of the room, and I'm looking for, again, opportunities for mundane things that could become symbolic. And so in this case, of the things on the wall behind her, she had this cross. Basically, it was in 7 separate pieces connected by small chains. And then just as I got to know her, it so happened that she's got a family of 7, but they're separated. The husband and a son were over in Europe trying to provide a way for the family to continue. She's there with her family. There's still relatives back there. It just so happened that the number of pieces of the cross matched the number of people in her family. It was still unified, but it was splintered. Again, it was in these 7 segments. And then it was, inscribed with the Lord's like prayer. And so again, just this ideas of like daily bread, thy will be done. It underscored with kind of one of her statements of like perseverance, despite passing through such hard moments, our faith remains strong. We live day by day, but we know Jesus is next to us. Like I knew kind of the moment that happened that, and in this case, I wasn't able to photograph the cross because that particular setting, we had decided it was inappropriate to gather photography. So I only had the option to describe it in text, but I knew I wanted to include it and perhaps make it my ending, because again, it was an anecdote that spoke volumes more than the facts could and more than the quotes could. And so this is the exit of that article. Okay, let me skip over this. This is just, I was going to walk through more specifically that story. And then this is probably the other thing that might be maybe a bit more unique for you in a writing workshop setting, but yeah, I'm a huge believer in this. You really want to think about how your story is going to be packaged and marketed and how it's going to move through today's main information pathways, Google and Facebook. Because again, you can have like a killer lead, right? But if people don't click into your article to get to the lead, it's like all lost. And so this is just a crash course in like digital. I'll skip that for this now. So that's one reason where, even though, say, for example, I was super proud of this title, Outpacing Persecution, like most of us in print, you're constrained to 2 or 3 words because you want to have a big opening spread with a bunch of images. So here's something which is only 2 words. It like alliterates. We all love alliteration. It hits the crux of the story that, hey, this is a story about persecution, but it's not a sad, hopeless story about persecution. It's a story about outpacing persecution. Why it's the best of times and the worst of times for India's burgeoning church. So, this particular spread did not win an award at EPA, but I probably would have argued it should have. But then online, totally something different, because that particular title, Outpacing Persecution, is not going to it's not going to perform well on Google. It's not clear enough. Many people do not want to read a persecution article. So in this case, at the time, India, which was really focused on driving both tourism and burnishing its image, had this campaign. Incredible India was the campaign. So they had a lot of collateral. There was like search activity around that. So I decided to riff off of it and call it Incredible Indian Christianity. Then, I went with the idea of a special report on, because, hey, I went for like 2 weeks. This is like a cover story. This has a ton of research behind it, original photographer behind it. Again, the downside of how all of our articles get flattened online and like segmented out online. No one would know if you saw this article in a string of, search results on Google or in a string of shared articles on Facebook. It's very difficult to communicate, hey, this isn't an ordinary article. This is not a blog. This is not an aggregation. This is a cover story. So I need a way for the title to communicate some of that specialness and, pros and cons of being so on the nose, a special report on. But that's the reason behind that. And then again, just going for some intrigues, the world's most vibrant Christward movement. The main reason that the bulk of my sources in the article were both concerned by the persecution, but were not like dismayed per se by it, was they were, again, astounded at the movement towards Christ that they were seeing among a number of historically hard to reach or move groups in India. And so in this case, I decided I wanted to honor the language they were using, like the idea of Christward movements was kind of the crux. And again, being something fresh. So I basically have the headline's trying to do 3 things. It's got a bid for Google. It's got a attempt to indicate that this is special, not normal. Again, something intriguing that, is accurate to the unique contribution of the sources. And then of course, images always like help. And so that particular image is of a mega church in Hyderabad. So all those women are like Christians or, are attending a large church. And so again, just seeing their colorfulness, seeing their like magnitude, that was, I think the best image to pair with the story. So similar with Nigeria, this is the print spread, again, a bit more poignant, a bit more staid. Got this quote of how long will it be amid Boko Haram and Fulani attacks? Nigerian Christians have no cheeks left to turn. Again, some cleverness, wordplay there in the deck. So for online, went with that for the title. There's, either one, this is a phrase that a lot of people like know. And so seeing it seeing it riffed on, seeing it twisted in this way would be hopefully interest people. Again, there are 2 main drivers there, Boko Haram and Fulani extremists. And so double persecution. And then in this case, because I knew that Nigeria is obviously very populous and very influential on the continent, but to be honest, not a lot of readers in the US have a deep interest in Nigeria. And so in this case, the choice is made to hide which particular country I'm talking about from the title, because there are certain settings where the title is going to move independently of the deck and the image. And so there's a bit of intrigue where, like, if you don't know what Africa's largest church is, and odds are you don't, another reason to click in is because you want to find out which one it is. Or again, maybe persecution falls for you on a scale of 5 to 10 of interest, but the idea of double persecution, what does that mean? Oh, that might tip you over the scales to click in. Or, many people do appreciate a good pun or a good wordplay. And so this idea of no cheeks left turn, which again goes along with like double, that's another effort to get people into that. So you can study these later so we can get to the questions, but this is something that we've kind of come up with over time to illustrate some of the things we think about. So on the left are steps for coming up with the perfect title, where we'll spend some time kind of playing with each idea. There's some just examples on the right of times where we've done it. And again, maybe in the questions, we just come back to the slide and I can walk you through it more. Again, some ideas of what to keep in mind if you're stuck, active verbs better than passive, trying to summarize the whole thing, leave the audience wanting more, reflect on all the titles you've clicked into over the past week and what really moved you. That's really key. There's this really fun card that NPR actually made. This is designed to be kind of like an airline safety card, which has there's a whole there are online articles that go with this card and explain it, and so I'll make sure you get that. And again, you can read it at your leisure. Again, you always have to assess the fine line between being too clever. So I mentioned the Russia-Ukraine article. So there was a moment when there was a rupture or attempt at a distancing between the Moscow affiliated Orthodox body in Ukraine, and so they had this line about thou shalt not kill, and then because it happens that the name of the Russian Orthodox leader is Kirill, and basically the gist of it is their argument that his stance towards the war was not the Christian one. I initially went with the clever, once in a lifetime chance to take a well-known phrase and riff off of it. So the second one, thou shalt not Kirill. I was super proud of it. I was like, this will win a headline award. This is great. But then I quickly got negative feedback from sources who either felt, well, no, they have been very careful in their article not to, again, specifically be in conflict with the patriarch. And my flattening of that kind of was basically, they argued inaccurate. I tried to argue them, well, do you want 50,000 people to read this or 5,000 people? But at the end of the day, I decided to respect their caution, and so then I dialed it back to the safer thing, where I just went with the direct quote from the verse instead of this once in a lifetime wordplay. Let me skip that. So then just one.
We have about 10 minutes.
Yes. So tell you what, I'll just do 2 minutes and I'll stop.
Okay.
So the other idea, and again, I've got a whole bunch on titles. We can have fun with that. There's titles and there's timing. Okay. So what we've learned, for example, this is the World Watch List that Open Doors puts out every year. It's one of the best treatments of persecution, but not enough people care about the persecuted church, right? So we actually put a lot of time into, over the years, because we cover it every year, refining how to best frame it. And so in this case, basically, we go with a more colloquial way. Persecution does not appear in the title at all. Calling out the listicle element, the 50 countries where it's hard to follow Jesus. We've got the year in there, both for Google, and I could explain how we study that. Again, it's a multilingual set piece. Another example on timing, this word cloud is of the top things that people give up on Twitter for Lent. This is based on maybe a sample of 400,000 people's tweets. Again, not all of it's serious, some of it's sardonic, but this is the list. So, there was a Christian researcher who every year would come up with this fun list. It's interesting. Again, we came up with a colloquial title based on the Google search trends data. But then we realized, what we were doing is every year we would basically post it either on Ash Wednesday, the day that Lent began, or on the final day of that week where he does a final analysis. And then when we studied the Google traffic, really the only time people really care about what to give up for Lent is the Sunday before Ash Wednesday, when they're reminded by their clergy that Lent is coming up. And if we basically came up with a way to frame the article 4 days ahead of Lent, we could basically triple the traffic. And so that was a matter of really discovering that, oh yeah, like title matters, but the timing matters as well. And tell you what, I will actually just pause this now and get to the questions, because this is more kind of like nitty gritty. I mean, overall, the idea is, your print title should almost always change for online. And then even if, you're in a habit of shoveling up your articles kind of like on like a monthly basis based on your calendar, I would really encourage you to shovel them up independently and try to wait for opportunities where the news cycle creates a hunger for interest in that topic. And again, that's an easy way to take your articles from like 1,000 people to 5,000, from 10,000 to 50,000. Like timing deeply matters, the title deeply matters, and that's unfortunately after you've done all the hard work of figuring out, the facts, the quotes, the paraphrases, and the anecdotes that go into your article. So, all right, Heather, yeah, let's hit up some of the questions.
Awesome. We've got two in the chat panel. The first one I'll ask you here is, what impact is AI having on journalism as it relates to missions?
Oh, yeah, interesting question. I personally would say it's like too soon to tell. I mean, we still don't know to what extent AI becoming incorporated into all of the search engines is going to make it even harder to get our links in like front of people, and then to what extent that they'll be satisfied by that kind of pastiche of knowledge and not want to go deeper. I definitely don't think AI is at a point where it can do some of these articles like for us. So at the moment, I mean, one way to look at it is I currently do use AI to help us produce our multilingual coverage. So basically, I've got a custom AI interface where when we identify, we produce an article in English, and then we, based on language coordinators, decide that it would have merit in other languages. We use AI to do the first pass to then ease the burden on the human translator or proofer, and that's actually going fairly well. It's allowed me to have about 50 volunteers be involved with the translations in the way that's not too burdensome to them. But then definitely we can't trust the AI solely, because while maybe they only get maybe 20% of the things wrong, often it's in these finer details and these like conjunctions or things like that that really do twist the meaning, particularly if you're working with like precise information. So so basically, I'm just as curious as you, but I'm not personally worried about AI yet.
So we have another question from Gwen. She says she would love to hear about the photographer writing working relationship and how to gather stories remotely.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so quickly on so on the photographer part, I would say two things. Historically, when I would do these trips where a photographer accompanies me, I had a real emphasis on, they are my shadow. They come and do everything I do. Because again, I never know when I'm going to witness something amazing, and like I have to have it captured. And then what often happens is, a lot of my work as the reporter is time spent with a single person in a single place talking for an hour, right? So this is kind of a waste of their time. They go nuts. You will stumble upon, like, say if you've got, like 5 destinations in your day, you don't know which of the 5 is going to be the most photographable. And then, it's very painful for them not to stay and linger and wait for just the right moment where, all the people in the public setting align just right to, get the dynamics there. So, I guess, like, long story short, in India, I made the photographer come with me to everything. And again, we were successful, but there were many times where, he was frustrated because, we're indoors at a desk talking to somebody, but this is those like twilight hours where, the sunlight makes everything all the more beautiful, and I should really be out capturing color. So with Nigeria, I much more regularly, we would start the day and end the day together, but very often we spent the bulk of the day like apart, where he either went back to things that we had witnessed before and he felt had more promise, or if my time was going to be committed to gathering information from a person at a chair, table, desk, whatever, he would just go like forage in the surrounding area and see what he might capture. So basically, I encourage you, again, I think maybe the way I would summarize it is, I think you should, if you haven't worked with them before, say spend at least like the first day, if not the first 2 days, having them be your direct shadow, because you do want them to understand what you're trying to gather, how you gather it, but then say have the final 2/3 of the trip, let them be much more free. So hopefully that's
yeah, that's good.
what was the second half?
Yep, if you want to add anything about how tips for gathering stories remotely.
Yeah, so gathering stories remotely. I mean, honestly, we are in a day and age where it may no longer be worth all the time and expense to go to the field in person. Again, depending on your access to the field and the field's level of connectivity. So, we actually made a strategic choice. I mean, in a heartbeat, I would have gone over to Ukraine when the war broke out. Like, I love those kind of like conflict settings. But one reason we decided not to was say versus what was taking place with ISIS in Iraq and Syria, or more recently there's been a bunch of jihadist violence over in like Burkina Faso and other parts of the Francophone Sahel. And there's a big challenge in getting information because there's not a lot of as much like internet penetration, smartphone penetration. What is there is taking place in like French, and that's expensive and laborious to bring over into English. So that's a setting where if I wanted to convey it, I really would have to go in person and pay for a translator and pay for a photographer, do all that. When Russia invaded Ukraine, just so happened that, there's a very robust, I guess I could switch to my video as well to show a face. There's a very robust, evangelical like community there, particularly the seminaries, and they're all like English speaking. And then they had like tons of access and where sending photos and videos, all that. So we decided instead of complicating their situation by making them responsible for trying to host us, feed us, get us from like A to B, all that time loss and just the mundane travel from like A to B, the level of connectivity was such that we could source the stories faster, but yet still credibly through distance. And so I will say the newer platforms like Telegram and like Signal and then obviously WhatsApp are really, really helpful for that in terms of, again, sources are already, I mean, everybody's a mass communicator now. So often what it was is just we got added into the communication stream that say a given seminary president was already doing for their constituents or for their backers. And then we would just like confirm with them what kind of things could be put into a journalistic setting versus needed to stay in their prayer letter or became falsified over time. So we basically were allowed into their own output about their situation. We, again, for our purposes, identified like angles, identified what Google would go for or not. And then, in that case also, because there's so much interest in the Western press that you've got a more robust amount of like images to choose from among the, the big things. But again, they could send us images that we needed. So the calculus there is really, again, do you have, the final thing would be, how quickly can you build trust with the leaders you need to get the story that you need? And so for example, I went to Cuba, I did 2 weeks in Cuba, out of respect for, the island's security situation. I did not actually do any of my bridge building until I got there. And what I had to do is like go around I went to like every major city, every major seminary, had to spend time introducing myself, like, woo people into my cause, get them to trust me, and then get the information. That requires both being there in person and taking time. With Russia, Ukraine, we basically, thankfully, had a couple people who were the like trusted trainers and advisors of all the seminary leadership there, and we had actually worked with them on prior articles. So because they already knew and trusted us, they very quickly encouraged all of their Ukrainian leaders to trust us and work with us. And we did not need to spend any time in person, face-to-face building that. Like we were able to use relational pathways to hit the ground running. So that would be the other thing you would evaluate.
Awesome.
Anything more?
I think we've run out of time.
Okay.
But Jeremy, can you tell us what your email address is really quick? Then maybe people can forward their question on to you.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Feel free to be in touch with me. It's pretty simple. It's J Weber, 1B. So JWEBER at christianitytoday.com. Like take some time with the, again, with the presentation, you can look at the color coding, kind of, maybe think for yourself about the choices I made. I do encourage you maybe go back at your old articles and color code them and kind of use that as a visual rubric And then in the fuller presentation, there's there are a bunch of examples or case studies, which I think should be fairly self-explanatory, that kind of look at some of the like examples of headlines we've done in the past. And I think if you browse through them, you'll see what I'm getting at, particularly because they illustrate the concepts on those two primary slides, the one that has the bullet points and then the one that's the fun like airline safety card. But again, if you want more, yeah, message me. Also, I did do not to rep another group, but I did do an online titles workshop for MTI, Magazine Training Institute, and you could probably access that for more details there. Or ask Heather to, invite me back or to the conference, and we'll do a whole deep dive with a ton of data.
We need to have you in person at one point. All right. Good. I think we're good. Mary Kay, if you want to start our closing slides here. I'm going to turn off my video. Thank you so much for what you've shared with us today, Jeremy. Let's end the recording now. This webinar has been